Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Slash Filmcast bonus episode. My name is David Chen, and with me are...
Devendra Hardwar.
Jeff Kanata.
And joining us today, her work has appeared at Vulture, Teen Vogue, SlashFilm.com, and Thrillist. Lindsay Romaine, welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. Lindsay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. We are broadcasting again sooner than I thought we would, because Devendra made the really good suggestion that, hey, there is so much conversation about The Last Jedi, and we should really get in on it. We should really, by the time next week, it'll be a little bit old, and so I agree. There's been a lot I want to say about it,
and I think the broader point is we all recorded our review before most of the world had seen the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so pure, Jeff. That review
it really was
so pure.
It's a glorious time.
I loved the fact that we got that down, because it would have been a very different episode. It would have been this episode. It would have been a very different episode if we had processed all of the general reaction, pro and con, to the movie from the public. So I'm really actually very glad that that is recorded. Like, my feelings in a vacuum are recorded,
preserved in digital amber, Jeff.
Yeah, or in in carbonite, one or the other, as the case may be. But for example, like, there's me ribbing Peter in the episode about the fact that he hated it, like, because I thought it was
he did not hate it. Let's not spread rumors. But,
I know. But I mean, that's the point. Is it was ribbing because I thought the idea of anyone hating it was impossible.
Right.
It seemed out of the realm of possibility to me. So I thought that was a joke of hyperbole to say that because Peter had some criticisms, he hated it. And I just it
was inconceivable to you that people could hate this movie.
I actually just re-listened to the episode right before starting, and it was funny because right at the end, Dave, you say, "I think this is going to be divisive." Jeff, you're like, "No."
I mean, I was a naive boy a week ago. I was I had so much to learn about the world, and so little had happened.
Let's break this down. There has been a very, as correctly predicted by me, there was an incredibly polarized response to Star Wars: The Last Jedi, to an extent that I could not even have predicted. I mean, I predicted it would be polarizing. I did not know it would be this intense.
Well, it's 2017, Dave, right? Yes. We can't have a civil conversation about anything. That's right. Everything is an apocalypse.
That is true, Dave. You took the cynical point of view and were proven right. What a shocker there.
That's right. So I kind of want to break down the responses I'm seeing. So I think it really started to become evident, right, that Friday. First of all, when we were seing some of the early Twitter reactions, or Thursday, Friday time period, we were seeing some of the early Twitter reactions roll in, and then the Rotten Tomatoes audience score, which is a thing that nobody pays attention to normally, was tracking at way under the critic score. The critic score is around 92, 93%, and the audience score, which is created by people who are on the site who are not rated to be quality critics or whatever, it theoretically represents the pulse of the populace. It was closer to 59%, and typically we see big gaps in the Rotten Tomatoes critic score and audience score. That is not an uncommon thing, but it is usually in the other direction. It's usually Transformers: The Last Night, for instance, having a pretty terrible Rotten Tomatoes critic score, but having a much better audience score because everyone kind of loves their Transformers. Transformers: Last Night had a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes for critics, but a 45% audience score. So that's 30% in the positive direction when you go to audience. Now, within these groups, this group of audience that's dissatisfied with The Last Jedi, I would break it down as follows, and you guys tell me what you think of this, okay? I'm gonna quote Hillary Clinton or paraphrase Hillary Clinton and say, you have your basket of deplorables who hate the progressive politics of The Last Jedi, hate that there are so many diverse characters. There's a lot of women, a lot of minority characters. And also, we should point out that largely the movie is about women telling men that they're doing it wrong. You know, that they shouldn't be so hot-headed.
Men not listening to women.
Not listening to women, right.
Yeah.
And it's a shocker that men on the internet took this the wrong way. So you have people who are just like not good people, just bad people who don't like this movie. So that's just like, I'm probably not going to do much to address those people during this episode. Then you have your hardcore Star Wars fans who don't like what this movie, The Last Jedi, has done to the franchise, to the myth, to the lore. They just aren't a fan of the direction that Rian Johnson has taken this movie. And within that, there is a subcategory that I didn't even think about during our review, which is people that were really into the extended universe. Now, Devere, I don't know, did you guys, any of you read the extended universe books? I used to read like the Timothy Zahn extended universe novelizations.
Yeah.
I have no attachment to any of that stuff.
No. Right, but
I read a lot of it. Yeah, I read the Timothy Zahn, and I used to read, I think it's like the X-Wing. I don't remember the exact names of them, but I've read a substantial amount of the EU. Yeah.
Those Timothy Zahn books came out in what, like 93, 94?
93, I'm pretty sure.
Decades ago, yeah.
So this is dating us, unless you read it recently. But I mean, I definitely read those when they came out. The reason I read those Timothy Zahn books when I came out is because I didn't think there was ever going to be another Star Wars movie.
Yeah, that's right.
And the way those books were marketed at the time was, here's as close to a like canonical continuation of the story as we are likely ever going to get. And so I rushed out and bought them because I thought, well, this is exciting. I know I'm never going to get another Star Wars movie. I mean, this is before the prequels. I know I'm never going to get another Star Wars movie, but at least I can imagine what one mind took, where one mind took this, and it sort of got the stamp of approval from Lucasfilm. But I think it's hard for people to even remember a time when we thought there were only going to be 3 Star Wars movies ever.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And do you guys have a sense, by the way, of how this movie in particular, I don't know, messes up in the EU? Because we knew after the Disney Lucasfilm deal that stuff would be gone. That stuff isn't canon anymore.
So Disney declared a few years ago that, hey, we're doing away with the extended universe so we can tell new stories. And I think the biggest betrayal of that extended universe is the character of Luke Skywalker. I mean, even Mark Hamill himself has said, I did not agree that was Luke Skywalker. I did not agree with that version of Luke Skywalker. He's kind of a bitter old man who's closed himself off to the Force, and that's just simply not the Luke Skywalker that's depicted in the EU. So I'm not saying, I'm not trying to I am not in any way disparaging or denigrating people who were really invested in that in the EU. I'm just simply trying to explain that there are people out there who are very disappointed in the new film because they've invested so much emotionally into the EU and have found that it really, truly does betray a lot of what the Luke Skywalker character was depicted as in that series.
And I'm not sure anything like that has ever happened in fandom, right? Where this big extended universe existed for a while, and then the real owners were like, oh, you know, or no, that was supported by Lucas and everything. And then after a while, they're like, you know, nah. Let's just go back on that.
I think another element of it too is that people expected, because The Force Awakens kind of borrows things from the EU, like Kylo Ren is sort of, there's a character in the EU named Jason Solo who is kind of a Kylo Ren figure. I think they were maybe thinking, okay, they threw out the EU, but they're still going to reincorporate it just maybe in like a different way. And this movie was like, no, not at all.
This movie doesn't even incorporate, you know, canonical elements of the last movie, right? I mean, it so far strikes off its own direction. Anyway, I'm almost done with my categorization here, which is like, number 1, the deplorables. Number 2, like the quote unquote hardcore Star Wars fans who really didn't like what this movie did to the franchise, of which a subset is extended universe fans. And then number 3, people who are just have legitimate grievances with the movie as a piece of filmmaking.
Right. The Festivus crowd.
And those people in category 3, I feel, just get lost. Like it's been very challenging to bring up problems with this movie online without being accused of being like a terrible hardcore Star Wars fan or a racist or a sexist. it's just been a fairly toxic environment under which to talk about this movie, and that's been unfortunate. But Jeff, you were going to say something.
Well, now that you framed it that way, I am worried that I will step in it as I might repeatedly, as I often do on this show.
As you often do, but go ahead, Jeff.
I will say, and I will try to put this as gently and as respectfully as I can, because I don't mean it to be dismissive. I truly don't. And I hope people hear that before what I say, which is, I think, well, let's just say maybe I don't think. Let me just present it as a question. I'll present it as a question. Do you guys think that there is perhaps some people that think they are in category 2, but on a certain level are kind of in category 1? They would never describe themselves in the terms that the hardcore category 1 people do, and would never express the views that those people express. But the sort of uneasy feeling that they can't quite put their finger on, that feels like a violation of Star Wars, that they don't even know how to express, may have some tendrils that lead into category 1.
Yeah, and maybe not through their fault entirely, too, right?
Right.
This is a fan culture that's been around forever, has not always been so kind to women and inclusive to women in general. It is one of the first fandoms on the internet. You know, it is all of these things put together. So I feel bad for those people who may be in category 2, who may be espousing some potential views of category 1. I honestly, by the way, I want to hear like more legitimate complaints about the movie. I feel like we brought up some of the main ones in our review. I have yet to read a good takedown of this movie on legitimate grounds, like why this movie fails on the terms of the movie, and not just because it's not the Star Wars movie you want, and not just because it ruins your fandom.
Well, I am going to try to represent the point of view of the people in category 3 on this episode of the podcast. So,
but I will tell you, I have been in hundreds of long text chains with close friends. I'm sure all of us have, right?
Yeah.
With close friends who are, I think, probably mostly in category 3. And I, of course, am in whatever the category is of the person who loved the movie and just unabashedly loves it.
Not described in my taxonomy. Yep.
Right. It's a different genus.
Yep.
So I definitely have had most exposure to the category 3 point of view, which is sort of a filmmaking / conceptual problem, pacing, all those kinds of issues, arguments. I've been having those arguments all week or 2 weeks, or however long it's been.
1
week. It seems like
1 week.
It seems like a month.
I started out a naive
Barely
little boy who thought that everyone would love his movie, his favorite movie of the year, and no, whatever.
Lindsay, I want to hear from you about what has been your experience watching this movie, talking about it online, because you seem to agree heartily with Jeff's assessment that there might be people who think that they're just like a hardcore Star Wars fan, but in fact are perpetuating some more unfortunate viewpoints.
I think, I mean, I'm kind of with you guys. I saw it at a press screening, so I also had the glory of kind of seeing it without the conversation being all around it. So I saw it without all of this prejudgment and was so high on it, especially because of the critical, early word was very positive. So I was like, oh my God, we all agree. This is so great. I was so excited. I went to the opening night screening with some friends, came back, checked Twitter, and was like, oh no.
It's the community gift.
I will admit I was also quite stunned that the reaction was so negative from people. Well, and from people who I trust and respect too. It wasn't it wasn't just like random people on the internet. It was like film critics that I respect, had a very lukewarm reaction, I would say.
I'm not even saying like film critics. I'm thinking like a lot of people I know who like movies and are into geeky things, and I think are more thoughtful about their opinions about things, came out hating the movie.
Yeah.
And then it's funny watching Twitter this week because like you would have somebody who just saw it was like, oh, I loved it, and then right behind it was, oh, I hated it, and that's kind of it, like that all week.
it's just really stunned me. I had to block an actual like old friend on Facebook who I shared Jacob Hall's article, that Slash Film article that's like Star Wars doesn't The Last Jedi doesn't care what you think.
Oh, how dare
great
you.
article. It went viral this
Great
week.
article.
And it kind of sums up like what The Last Jedi is trying to do really well. So
totally. And I think maybe the title sounds a little harsher than what his points are.
Right.
And that's what I think maybe this person responded to, was just whatever, and just said something really nasty to me in a personal way. And I was like, what? This was like not something, it spurned this kind of hatred and intensity that I was not expecting at all in general. And to go off of Jeff's point, which is, are there some people that maybe think they're in category 2, but are maybe in category 1? I don't want to throw anyone under the bus or say anything, because I don't think if you're in that category, you think or are necessarily a bad person. But I think if your knee-jerk response is, I'm not one of those people, if you know you're not one of those people, you know you're not one of those people, And so that's always been my thought with that. If you know you're not, an asshole racist, then you're not, and you don't have to defend yourself from it. And when you try really hard to defend yourself from it and end up saying stuff that's kind of nasty in the process, which I've seen a lot of, that's where I think it gets into this murky territory.
So at this point, how many times have we seen the film? I actually saw it twice. I think everyone here has seen it twice. Lindsay, have you seen it twice?
I saw it 4 times.
Wow.
The 4th time was kind of an accident.
Barely 4 days since the premiere, but wow.
Lindsay tripped and fell and ended up in the theater where they're showing it the 4th time. Right?
Well, the first time I saw the press screening, the second time I went with friends opening night. The 3rd time I was like, I probably won't get to see this again in theaters, so I'm just going to go. And then the 4th time I was at like a holiday party, and after some beers, we were all like, let's go see it. So that's kind
sure.
Nice.
I saw it the first time at a press screening, and then the second time was the very first showing at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, which is sort of the historic place for
they do movie premieres there and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's also for Star Wars in particular. In '77, it was sort of ground zero for the hype that became the sort of grassroots movement of Star Wars. And they kind of make a big deal about that. I saw The Force Awakens there on opening night as well, and it's cool. They do a whole big shindig, like you get a special card that says you were there opening night, and they have people dressed up, and they have all kinds of special stuff, and it's cool. But the reason I bring it up also is that that second time I saw it in 3D, so I don't know if anybody's seen it in 3D yet.
Was it?
Yeah,
worth
I saw
it
it once in 3D.
Oh, that was one of Lindsay's 4 viewings.
Yeah. I thought the 3D actually was done pretty well. I wouldn't say it was really worth the extra ticket price. Like I didn't add much to the movie, but I actually thought that the 3D experience was pretty solid.
You didn't come away thinking that was a waste of money, right?
I didn't think it was a waste of money. I spent it was like $40 to see that movie that night, by the way.
Yeah, I did that too. I did one of the fan screenings that was like $40. That was kind of a waste of money, but that's a separate conversation.
But it was cool to be there and be part of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's worth the extra money. But I didn't think it took anything away from the movie. I thought it actually was a pretty solid 3D conversion.
I think we saw that too with Force Awakens. Like the 3D, it was still a post conversion, but they did a decent job for certain scenes. I saw it again last night, actually, at the Dolby Prime screen at the AMC Empire here. And have to say, there are a handful of these screens around the country and the world at this point. If you can see this movie there, just do it. Totally it is an enormous screen. Yeah, I'm sure.
My press screening was on a Dolby screen, and it was incredible. I would only ever watch movies that way if I could.
Yeah, because the screen is huge. It is like floor to ceiling. There's like a very limited amount of seats, but the sound is just like it
shakes your seat.
There are many subwoofers in that theater, and it is like louder than Dunkirk in IMAX. It's just like hitting
the light speed scene where where Laura Dern's ship in Dolby is like out of this world.
You feel it in your stomach.
We should say, by the way, that we are going to spoil The Last Jedi to shreds. No, it's cool. You didn't really say anything that much.
Should be more.
We are going to spoil everything. So you shouldn't.
Did you guys see somebody tweeted today a picture of a sort of just 8x10 or 8.5 by 11 white sheet of paper printed out that was posted at an AMC theater on the door of the theater showing Last Jedi that said, there is a scene about an hour and a half in.
Yeah,
I got it. I have the exact quote here. The Last Jedi contains a sequence at approximately 1 hour and 52 minutes into the movie in which all sound stops for about 10 full seconds. While the images continue to play on the screen, you will hear nothing. This is intentionally done by the director for a creative effect.
This is not new.
So they gave that notification to projectionists.
Yeah, projectionists.
And I saw that. That was one of my only spoilers before this movie, was that someone on Twitter posted the projection note. So I knew that there was a moment of silence at some point.
Someone posted it before you saw the press screening?
Yeah. Wow. I think because they sent that ahead to projectionists. Wow. Probably like a week or so, whenever they delivered the film. I don't know.
Yeah, because if you were a projectionist and that moment happens, you'd probably be freaking out about something going on.
I used to be a projectionist, and I would have freaked out.
Yeah, because it's not like there's nothing going on screen at that time.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's
Well, you'd worry that you like mess something up. Yeah.
It's such a symptom of our times.
I was a projectionist too, and I never sat an hour and 52 minutes into a movie. I started the projector and left.
I didn't, unless it was a Star Wars. The first movie I ever did projection on was Revenge of the Sith. So
wow.
Guys, come on. I used to be a projectionist for real, like with the reels, with the cigarette burns, and you have to press.
Me too, dude. Yeah. Come on.
You can't just leave those, Jeff. You need to be there for the changeover.
I had brain wraps, dude. You ever had a brain wrap?
Yeah.
That's like that scene. It's like that scene in Gremlins, but for real. You know, where the Gremlins, where you
got to be more specific than that, Jeff.
You know, in Gremlins, that scene where I think it's actually in Gremlins 2, actually, but where they're in the theater and then they like the movie's going normally and then it stops for a second and then it starts burning through the film on the screen. You remember that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah,
that happens with actual celluloid because the lamp that is used to shine light through the celluloid is so hot that if the celluloid stops for too long in one spot, it will literally melt the celluloid. So what happens is
the good old days.
As the film, the actual film, back when that was a thing, is being fed off these giant platters inside the projection room. And if any of them have any problems, things, there's a strand that gets screwed up and things start unspooling and everything stops and clogs, then you get what's called a brain wrap, where it wraps around the brain of the projector. And
so you're bad at your job, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, I was terrible. I was terrible.
Left the screening, set everything on fire.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I want to give a shout out to Brian Davids in the chat room, who has seen the movie The Last Jedi 8 times. That's like once per day since it was out.
Yeah,
so that's pretty
guys, give it some time. Let it sit a little. I have to say, I really appreciated having a week between these screenings, even though I've seen it twice. First of all, these warnings, that is the most 2017 thing I could think of right now, by the way, because it's like, if an audience has 5 seconds of silence to think about anything, they'll realize the emptiness of their lives and just get up and leave. I guess that's what it is. I don't know.
I saw the movie a second time with my fiance on the Friday morning of release. And at our local theater, the movie was screening every hour, 24 hours. So like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. it was screening. We went to the 7 a.m. showing on Friday morning so I could go before work.
Wow.
And when we got there, the kid who was ripping the tickets, who looked like he couldn't have been more than like 21 years old, was... we talked. I sasaid thank you for your service, and he said he had been working since midnight. He had been working since midnight. It was like 6:30 a.m. when we got there. He had been working since midnight, and he had not been able to see the film yet. He was working, doing the tickets, and people were dropping spoilers walking out of the theater, and he had to listen to it. So that guy sacrificed his Friday early morning so everyone could enjoy the movie. Guy at Regal Meridian in downtown Seattle at Friday morning for Last Jedi, I salute you. Just wanted to give him a shout out.
to you.
Yeah.
Have to say, by the way, that this movie, I think more than anything I've seen this year in theaters, really rewards multiple viewings, right? Because going into something like this, right? I'm the first viewing. I'm eager to like, okay, what's happening with Rey? What's going on? Who are her parents? What's the plot? What's going on here? And you watch these movies a very different way, especially this movie. You watch it a very different way the second and third time. You're really able to like, I could take a step back and really look at the pacing, and actually felt like there was less of a pacing issue. I think before I was just really eager to get to the interesting race stuff. And the second time, like the Canto Bight stuff, everything with Rose, actually, I really loved Rose the second time around because
me too.
Her portrayal, like the actress is so open-hearted, like she has such a big heart, and it really shows through entirely on screen. The Canto Bight stuff, I actually appreciate as being like a very different side of the galaxy that we've never really seen before in these movies. And I think that's partially it. These movies are showing us a lot of new things, like Leia using the Force to fly in space, in astral projection and Force time, and all that stuff is hard to kind of stomach all at once. And this movie also gives you narrative whiplash, like several times. So it's easy to feel disoriented as you're watching it, right? Because Rian Johnson sets up these plot points and completely reverses it. He completely implodes J.J. Abrams' mystery box. And I think for a lot of people, that was a big problem too. Because, you know, the way Abrams works, he sets up these nice little tidbits of plot and gets you interested for a while. And Rian Johnson basically exploded all of them. And I think that's why a lot of people have been pissed too.
Arguably retcons some of it. But so... to respond to what you just said, Devindra, I mean, I think sometimes you watch a movie again and you appreciate it more. You're like, this is much more brilliant than I thought it was. Sometimes you watch a movie again and you realize its flaws more. And for me, that was actually my experience. I mean, I had a good time the second time watching the movie again, but its flaws were more stood out in more relief to me the second time. And all the stuff with like the Canto Bight, it really worked even less for me, knowing that it would be completely inconsequential.
Right.
But
it's
I understand.
shorter. It's shorter than we thought.
It's only like a few. It's like what, 5-10 minutes. You know,
it's
not,
under 10 minutes.
Yeah,
like,
it's not. You're right. It is not that
Yeah.
long. And for a sequence of the movie that's really short, it does seem to attract a lot of vitriol online. But it just is like so much. They're trying to cram so much stuff into that plot line. Like there's an animal rights subplot in the thing, you know.
I mean, it hints at a lot of things. I don't think it like is making a long essay about all of them, but it does. It's like seeing the cantina for the first time. It's like, oh, what's this alien? What's going on over here? Who's singing?
Yeah,
what's the song?
I agree with you that what's cool about that sequence is it does expand the universe of Star Wars, because the vast majority of Star Wars stuff we've seen is very similar planets, all of them involved in this kind of war between, the Republic or the Empire and the Resistance or the Rebellion. It's all kind of centered around that conflict. And here's a planet that doesn't have to do with any of that, really. They don't give a crap about any of that stuff. And
this planet's just making bank from all of the mess,
right?
And that's the war is untouched over there,
right? So that is kind of I appreciate the principle of that, but. It worked less for me on second viewing, just because we know how it ends, which is that the quest that they're on is ultimately not achieved. But Lindsay,
I think the realization of that world isn't as strong as it perhaps could be. But for me, the biggest crime that sequence commits is that I should want a long ear. I should dream about leaping on the back of a long ear like I dream about leaping onto a speeder bike in Return of the Jedi. But that the action sequence that leads up to does not do that for me. And I think just as a pure realization of that fantasy, it's just not fun.
Yeah, and I think Devindra, you're saying it doesn't fully explore this, but there is this kind of big moment that Finn and Rose have that's where he says, well, at least it was worth it to completely destroy that city, and she says, and she takes the saddle off and sends the long ear out, and she's like, now it's worth it. And that just felt really unearned to me. I did not feel like, oh, this is the culmination of this very well thought out plot line.
I mean, they did actually release a whole a whole band of these little Last Guardian creatures, which
good
I found it to be kind of rewarding in that respect, right? They did something. They accomplished something, even though they're not stopping everything. That didn't seem totally unearned. And another thing in that sequence, I do hope we get to see more of Justin Theroux's Master Codebreaker. That's like a fun little character riff he was doing, and I hope he shows up again in a future movie.
I don't know. Even that little bit of him felt goofy. I was like, "Oh, this is the person we've been trying
the right
to find."
kind of goofy. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things that have come to light in the last week since we recorded our episode. Right. One thing that I appreciated that I saw on Twitter was someone said like. It is now Star Wars canon that Maz Kanata and Justin Theroux have fucked in this movie, or in this universe, which I thought was pretty hilarious. And another thing that came to light is there was some debate during our Last Jedi episode about how much leash did Rian Johnson have, and was he being dictated to about what he could do? And the answer seems to be not at all. That he kind of had free reign to do basically anything. Like he could close out the Snoke and the Rey storylines however he wanted.
The worst ramification for that, I think, is that there was no overarching 3-film structure.
Right.
There was nothing set in stone before The Force Awakens happened that was the arc of this trilogy, which I think is a little strange, surprising.
It may be strange. It's probably a good thing that they didn't have that. Yeah,
I don't know about that. I think it's a classic JJ starting a show with an awesome first episode and not having any idea where it's going.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Well, I was actually going to speak to that point too, because I do think that there's so much emphasis placed on having something planned out ahead of time now. I've seen that argument a lot about it. And like George Lucas didn't have the original trilogy planned out. Luke and Leia make out in the second episode. Right. I think that there's a lot of value in seeing how, maybe not seeing how people respond to it and going through that, but just seeing how the movie lands and going from there. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's creativity, and I think I don't think that kind of each person bringing a different perspective to this thing is a bad thing. I think isn't that kind of what we want a little bit from this? Because it's so, I understand certain things, and I think they might be playing lip service a little bit. I feel like there's maybe some things planned out to a certain degree, at least in terms of like the Rey parentage thing.
Right.
It's come out that JJ and Ryan agreed on that. Like, even though Ryan has said, like, I didn't have to do this. So I think that there are some things kind of in plan that they don't want to, they want to like make it look like this a tour driven thing,
Well, to disagree with myself completely in that last moment and agree with you guys. One of the things that people have criticized The Last Jedi for that I just don't understand is this feeling of, well, now I don't know what episode 9 is going to be.
Right.
Which is, I just do not fundamentally understand that criticism.
Like for the first
most
time,
exciting part.
Yeah, for the first time in Star Wars history, we have no idea what's going to come next.
How great is it that it's not this freaking template that is so
or not Star Wars history, like the last 20 years, let's say.
Well, and what's so great about that is that another thing that I don't understand is that a lot of the criticisms of this movie are JJ problems and not Rian Johnson problems.
Agreed, 100%.
They are things that he set up that Ryan had to reconcile with, that I don't think he would have necessarily chosen to if he didn't have to. Luke being secluded on that planet is one of them. That's not something he decided. That's something that he was handed and had to make it real. A lot of other things, the Rey, Snoke, whatever, are things that Ryan, it wasn't necessarily his choice, and he just had to kind of go with it the way that he could. And that's been kind of one of the interesting things, is like, well, what was Luke supposed to do on this island based off of what you think The Force Awakens set up?
Right, was he supposed to be like super psyched to be on the planet, It doesn't really make sense.
You're just like, I don't know, islands are mysterious, okay? It works.
So, okay, so really I want this episode to kind of be our opportunity to go back and say some of the things we wish we could have said, on last week's episode of the show. And I have a few things that I want to talk about. But one of them is, upon watching the movie a second time and also rewatching The Force Awakens in the last week, it does occur to me that there was, some retconning going on. One of the biggest pieces was Jeff Kanata. I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago when we reviewed the Force Awakens, you were super psyched at the Knights of Ren, right? These people that Kylo Ren had recruited and they had together taken down the Jedi Temple. Now, it is mentioned in this movie, The Last Jedi, that Kylo Ren takes some disciples with him, which we never hear anything about. But it's never alluded to that there were Knights of Ren. It's never alluded to that these disciples helped him destroy the temple. It feels like the Knights of Ren is just completely done away with in service of the kind of Rashomon-esque retelling in this episode of the franchise. So
that is interesting. And I think, to go back into my headspace of 2 years ago, I think perhaps one of the reasons that I was so stoked about that was that there's not a lot in The Force Awakens that's new. I mean, the characters are new, and I remember being effusive about my praise for the characters because I think the characters are wonderful. But it felt like the concepts at play. I mean, we went on at length about Starkiller Base being all these analogs, right?
Right.
And this concept of the Knights of the Ren felt like it could be a really interesting new idea that is explored in the Star Wars universe. And part of the thing that I love about The Last Jedi is how much new it's boldly willing to introduce. And a few of the places where I think it misses the mark, especially in a rewatching, were where there are opportunities to even go more new. Like, we didn't need to have new AT-AT walkers at the end those could be a completely new thing on the Salt Planet, right? That could be a fight with completely new visuals. So much of the visuals in that scene are great and new, but I wish more of this new trilogy gave us fresh, interesting ideas. I mean, even as we criticize Canto Bight a bit, I at least admire the fact that it seems like a completely new corner of the universe, and we're introducing new ideas into the worlds instead of just another desert planet or another ice planet. Like, the idea of a salt planet is fucking amazing. It's so cool.
Did you guys see that Twitter thread about the guy who was like, what kind of crazy person tastes a planet?
Like, have you ever? Can you imagine going to a new planet that you've never been to before and just tasting it? That's just a weird thing.
I forget whose thread that is, but that is
Owen Ellickson, I believe, wrote that thread. Yeah.
Okay. Some guys in an infinite timeline in infinite space, there is a chocolate planet, and I will taste the hell out of that chocolate planet.
Lindsay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that moment I've seen people say as some kind of meta commentary also that, like, people are salty about stuff in Star Wars. I don't know if that's true, but I thought it was
I heard it, like, on Reddit, that it's a meta moment to be like, hey, this really isn't Hoth,
Right.
It's the movie's way of explaining, we're not on Hoth,
Right.
Yeah, I love that
also
too.
to have a Gareth Edwards cameo, because that's really what it is.
Oh, yeah,
Is it?
It's Gareth Edwards, not the one who tastes it, but the one
guy
who's right
next to him,
behind him.
The guy who's like, what is this idiot doing?
Yeah.
To what you're saying, though, Jeff, I think this is, like, in terms of Star Wars, this is the newest Star Wars we've ever gotten, right? That takes us to new places and shows us new things. The prequels, for all their faults, actually threw in a lot of new stuff.
Oh yeah,
a lot of it wasn't
amazing.
Good. Yeah, and some of it looked really interesting. I think conceptually is interesting, but in terms of, like, pushing the story forward and away from, like, the Luke setup, I think in a way, and introducing new things and telling us there's more plot going on beyond this, this family. This movie is doing new, interesting things. And I kind of feel like that's part of the backlash against it, too. A lot of people were complaining about Rey being a nobody, as if that devalues her as a character. Because I knew so many people who had money betting that it was like, oh, she's clearly Obi-Wan's daughter or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think I think the movie is supposed to make you think that she and Kylo are brother and sister, and then that's the swerve at the end. Like, we're supposed to think that they have a link, like Luke and Leia have a link.
That tension seemed a little more interesting.
I was going to say, I have a
very
very different read on that, and I think that's something I've noticed this in conversation with men versus women for some reason, that women see all of the Kylo Rey stuff as very sexual.
That is a Tinder connection right there.
Yeah,
no, I've read it as like there is a lot of sexual tension as well. So yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Especially, I mean, that's my big thing. I know we kind of talked about. Well, Dave and I talked a little bit about Rey's arc in this movie, and a lot of that to me is her learning how to follow her desire, whether that's good or bad. But Rey has the stereotypical, I can save the bad boy, I can make him a good boy, thing that I think is a big part of adolescent girlhood, at least straight girlhood, that you think you can save this bad boy. And that I think that's a really kind of a thing. She sees that Luke isn't going to be there for her in the way that she needs him to be, or that she expected him to be. And so all of this connection with Kylo is her kind of coming to terms with, maybe I like this. I don't think it's quite, I think it's more subtextual than
he
that.
understands me.
Yeah. He can be the one, he can be my answer to all of this. We can save each other. There's just like so much of that in there to me.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the Rey arc. I've seen, this is kind of one thing I wanted to talk to you about, Lindsay, because I think from what I saw on Twitter that the Rey character really resonates with you. And, I've read some opinions online this week that I kind of am really sympathetic to. First of all, Star Wars The Last Jedi in many ways blows up a lot of what the previous films valued. It's all about, are you in the bloodline of the Skywalker family? Like, are you unknowingly one of the chosen ones, right? That is going to help bring balance to the Force. It's going to be, help save the Republic or save the rebellion or the Resistance or whatever. That there is something in like lineage and the like honoring your ancestry, honoring your origins that this movie series has always revered. The Last Jedi says, forget about all that. The Force belongs to everyone now, right? Yeah. Even the little broom kid at the end can manipulate the Force, and so it's kind of saying everything that came before. What I really liked about the message is everything that came before, we keep it in our hearts or, in the Millennium Falcon, book drawer, but we forge on ahead without it. Rey tries to strike a balance between the old and the new. Adam Driver character, Kylo Ren's character says, forget about the past, bury it. Is what he says in the movie. And Rey says, we're not going to bury it, we're going to honor it, but we're also not going to be beholden to it, right? And
but also kill it if you have to, which shows his... He goes a little extra far.
Kill it if you have to, but otherwise try not to kill it and just...
I have to say, this democratization of power, anybody who watched Buffy, we saw this. Yeah. Like, Buffy went from a show that was all about, there was this chosen one who's here to fight evil, and by the end, it was, oh, by the way, this power belongs to all women.
Well, hold on.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
A lot of people have to say. Go ahead. Lindsay, you start and then Jeff.
Sorry. I was going to say, I mean, I totally get that. I felt kind of that Buffy connection also. But I also think it's a Star Wars tradition. I mean, there are the Skywalkers. There's also an entire Jedi Order that is not a bloodline thing. In fact, they don't marry and they don't have kids. So that's kind of the point, is that everyone has always been able to be Jedi. So I don't think this is backtracking any kind of Star Wars mythos for her to not be... I think she's still a chosen one to a degree, in that Snoke kind of infers that she's the Force's answer to Kylo in a way. She is the other super raw person who's going to restore this kind of balance to his extreme darkness or whatever. But I don't think it's saying that the Force has always belonged to everyone, and that's always been a concept. And so I think these people are really angry that Rey's not someone special bloodline-wise. I don't think that that's even going against Star Wars history. Really.
Well, this is what I was about to say. My theory, probably wrong, but my theory of what the 9-episode Skywalker saga is it started that the Force was for everybody, and then the moment Anakin Skywalker was born, that changed. He wiped out all the Jedi, had to be redeemed, and then this new trilogy is re-democratizing the Force.
Totally,
it is.
I agree.
It goes from there's tons of Jedi, there's tons of Sith, everybody's rocking and rolling, to only one person says no, it's all for me. It's all for me. I get it all. I have more power I got more midichlorians than anybody. It's all for me.
Yeah.
And then we have to the entire struggle of this 9-episode arc is to get back to a place where no, it's for everyone. And the Skywalkers are actually the worst thing that could ever have happened to the Force.
That's what I was going to bring up also, is that I love that this movie subverts this idea that the Skywalkers are the special one. I think this proves after 2 trilogies that the Skywalkers are like the poisoned bloodline.
Let's just kill all the Skywalkers. Yeah.
Well, the idea that anybody that says I want to take from the many and give to myself, is that's really what Darth Vader did. Was I'm going to go and kill everybody else that's like me and be the only one left. Right. And then, oh nope, you had 2 kids, and so there is hope that we can. There'll be more of them. And then all of a sudden the Force literally awakens, not in Rey, but around the galaxy. And now because the Skywalkers are waning, we get to be back to a place where, but there's still this evil, last Skywalker in the form of Kylo Ren. So maybe it all leads up to that realization. I don't know.
Who would have thought an evil Skywalker? Yeah. I think what I love most about this movie is it really puts the Skywalkers and the Jedi on blast. Basically, it's like you guys, you've had thousands of years and you fucked it up. You fucked this all up. You go back to like the geeky, like what was Darth Vader's motivation? What was Anakin's motivation? It was like the Jedi and their weird like restrictions, and you can't have relationships, you can't have a wife, and the dude just wanted to have his beautiful, princess queen wife. And they couldn't have it. It was a lot of him and his rage is the response to that, and it's like a problem that the Jedi completely created on their own. So now we're sounding really geeky, but I love that this movie at least really takes that all into account.
So I have many thoughts, and I want to hear your guys' reaction to it. Okay, and I've read these very interesting Twitter threads this week that I'm gonna read to you guys. They're not very long, but when I left the theater with my fiance, she felt in some ways betrayed by this movie. And I would say she is squarely in the category 2 of hardcore Star Wars fans that. And also number 3. Like that. Just she didn't think the movie was particularly well put together, but she also just felt like it was a betrayal of everything that Star Wars has been building up to, and I was kind of taken aback by that feeling because obviously I did not experience it when I first saw the movie. But let me read these threads and then let's go from there, okay? Because I'm gonna say some things that all 3 of you will find objectionable, and then we can hopefully come to a place of agreement from there. So Joseph Kahn. This week, the director of films such as Torque and Bodied, and he's also directed some of Taylor Swift's newest music videos. He tweeted out the following in response to The Last Jedi. He said, quote, "Rey doesn't need to be trained. She's already a lightsaber and telekinesis master just because she wants to be. She's the millennial Jedi. Luke failed every lightsaber fight. Ass kicked in Empire. Hand shot in the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Emperor bodied him until his dad stepped in. Luke blew up the Death Star, but Han Solo shot everyone, so unlike the other dead rebels, Luke had a clear line of sight, and even then, Obi-Wan coached him with Force GPS. If Rey did the Death Star run, she would have blown away every TIE fighter herself, told Obi-Wan to shut the fuck up, launched missiles while lightsabering Vader's hands off, and resurrected 5 Porgs using the Force. Rey and Luke can be considered equal in success if struggle and effort are negated from the equation. Just results. They both win, and that's all that matters to modern audiences, I guess. The theme of the original trilogy is, I want a greater life and I need to believe in myself. The theme of the new trilogy is, I'm awesome, confirmed, end quote. So that's one interpretation of the movie. Here is another one that's somewhat similar. This is from Sean Elliott, who is one of my podcast inspirations. And Sean Elliott here writes on Twitter, quote, aside from the fact that Yoda, Snoke's, Obi-Wan, Palpatine, etc. are not part of a dynastic bloodline that began with the son of a slave, aside from the part where the movie concludes with another Skywalker on the galactic throne, The Last Jedi's alleged middle finger at the Skywalkers ultimately amounts to this message. Only the 1 in a trillion Force savant blessed at birth inherits the star spot. It's still the myth of the genius fetishized. End quote. And I thought that was an interesting interpretation because it kind of asserts that the power structure that's been established in the previous film has been toppled and replaced, but only by another power structure. I don't think that one way to read the film, we won't know this until we see the next movie. Maybe the next movie, everyone all around the place, millions of people are going to be like ultra force users like Rey. Maybe that's going to happen. But one legitimate way of reading this film, I think, is that Rey is so ridiculously powerful, right? Like she presumably has not trained in the ways of the Force and lightsabering and piloting or whatever as much as Kylo Ren has, and is still able to completely annihilate him. And there's nothing like inherently wrong with a character that's like that. But if that's the case, then that means, only a 1 in a trillion Force savant, like only someone who is ridiculously good can be a part of the story. Adam Driver says in this movie, or Kylo Ren says, you're not part of the story. Your parents are nothing. You're not part of the story. And Rey goes to prove him wrong. Yeah, she only goes to prove him wrong because she's ridiculously good at all this stuff, of which only 1, in a billion people are going to be. So, Lindsay, let me start with you because the Rey storyline really resonated.
Sorry, can you hear me? Like, yeah.
You're like seething with rage right now. So what do you make of that interpretation?
First of all, going back to that first thread, that actually made me like physically angry because Rey and Luke come from very different perspectives when they're entering this. Rey is a woman who has lived by herself since she was 8 years old on a planet where she's been forced to protect herself. If anything, if you want to make a real world kind of allusion to that, how many women are coming forward with all of these stories of having to sort of overcome instances where they're, subjected to horrificness, Rey has lived on her own forever and has had to defend herself. And The Force Awakens, in that opening, when you see her for the first time without dialogue, you see all of the ways that she's proficient in taking care of herself because she's had to be her whole life. Whereas Luke was raised in comfort. He was raised by an aunt and uncle who loved him. He wasn't an orphan. I mean, he was an orphan, but he wasn't, without family or without safety. Rey was completely opposite. She was completely by herself. So when people try to act like, oh, she's just this perfect person, it's like, try being a woman in this world, please.
First, it was a little hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also being completely alone, like not cared for in any way, and having to navigate that when all of these different systems are against you just being alive in this world. So I think that's part of what I take issue with when people talk about Rey being a Mary Sue or whatever, as that kind of insinuates that she's just this privileged millennial. It's like Luke was the privileged millennial. If you really want to go for it, he was the one who had family name, he had the protection, he's the one who kind of had all of this safeguard. And to act like he didn't, even if he wasn't great at lightsabers, the very first time he ever trains in the lightsaber with Obi-Wan, the second time he ever picks up a lightsaber with his eyes blindfolded, he's able to perfectly navigate that thing, the testing thing.
Let me just be clear, I think I agree with Daisy Ridley that the term Mary Sue is incredibly sexist and is not a term I would use. She put it very well. She said, do we say of male characters that are really powerful that they're like Ryan Craigs or whatever? I think she's just using a random male name. That it's a ridiculous term. I don't agree with it, but I do think it is great to hear your perspective. That like from your perspective, she trained at the School of Hard Knocks. Jakku is like a brutal, unforgiving location, and she had to like raise herself in it, and so there's some credibility to the idea that that she would be good at survival, through the
and
skills she built up.
Right? That's the thing too that's always bothered me, is that you literally see her fight off people trying to rob her. You see the reason she's good at piloting is because she spends all day, scavenging ships for parts. Obviously that would acquaint you with how these things work. and has been doing that for at least a decade, probably more. So I think it shows you all of the stuff you need to know about her. And then also when she fights Kylo Ren, he's just been shot with a bow staff in the arm and just killed his dad. I don't think that he's at the full, and it literally shows him bleeding and punching himself. Like, I just have never understood that argument.
And he also fought off Finn for a part of the fight too. Like that fight took a lot of things to take him down. She never...
and she's bad.
We never see her go toe-to-toe with him. Yeah.
If you watch that scene, she's jabbing him and running away for most of it. She only really bests him at the very end once she kind of connects with the Force, whatever. But
so
I do think that it would be strong cinematically to have some training for her in the context of the films. I do think that those would not be scenes that would make any of the movies worse. But I will say this, and this may be a weird analogy.
And to be clear, there is some training in this movie, But
I feel like she does as much training as Luke does, by the way.
Yeah, she is swinging the lightsaber on the rocks on the side of the mountain, so it's not like there's no training. But anyway,
I think by the way, Dagobah is kind of a training montage.
There wasn't really a big montage in this movie. Maybe all these problems could be solved with a montage. But anyway, Jeff, go ahead.
You need a montage.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me just make this weird analogy, and then maybe this is only applicable to me because it's in my particular Venn diagram of interests, but there are a lot of people, very smart people. There are copious volumes written about the fact that this dude named William Shakespeare could not have possibly written the works that we know as Shakespeare. There's no way he could have written it because he's just some guy. There's nothing special about him. There's no way. It had to have been Lord Byron or somebody that had this noble birth and was around books and was trained by the world's greatest scholars. And there was no way it could have been just some dude that lived in Stratford upon Avon and just raised a family and worked out a living in the theater. Like, there's no way that person could have genius in them of this magnitude. How is that? But guess what? That's the way this shit works. In the history of time, the dude who has the trust fund and all of the learning around them doesn't do anything because they don't have to.
Except become president sometimes, but yes.
The royal birth kid has no. There's nothing to gain by writing the works of Shakespeare.
Very little drive there. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to write me emails. They're going to say there's this example and this example of these blessed kids that are also created something great. But the vast majority of the great works of human creativity and daring and science, everything that we have done as a species that is important, the vast majority of it has been done by nobodies.
Okay, so I'm convinced, you guys. You guys have convinced me. Okay, let's move on past the first point of like, is Rey overpowered, or how did she come to be in the position she's in? I don't even really have an issue with that part.
Yeah.
But I am bringing it up because I know people have that complaint.
Okay,
but
can I say one more thing?
Yep, go
because ahead. Joseph Kahn's analogies actually works really well. Because if Rey is the millennial hero, then Luke is the baby boomer hero, who is assisted by all his friends and the infrastructure and the support. And hey, he blew up the Death Star. And Rey has to work on her own for everything. And she has all this emotional debt that she'll never pay off.
Mm.
Yep.
So
She has the Force VoIP that she uses.
Yep. She has Force time. Yeah.
So what do you guys make of the second point, though, the one by Sean Elliott, which is that, Jeff, if you were making a movie about how English, like poetry and writing and the power of English is for everyone, you wouldn't necessarily choose William Shakespeare, a 1 in a trillion person, to make that point, right? Because William Shakespeare is kind of an edge case. You know what I'm saying? So if this movie is supposed to show the democratizing power of the Force, I don't know that
you would almost I don't know, have other characters that do things in the movie. It would be almost as if you would not make the movie only about Rey. There would be other characters that contribute to the success of film. In fact, maybe you would make the movie explicitly say that it takes a lot of people to do a thing, and we are the spark that lights the resistance.
Fire
like
that will burn the First Order down.
Literally say we can't have a Jedi save us. We actually have to do so. I don't know. Maybe that's what the tact you would take if you were actually making a movie about it.
Read the text.
That sounds pretty outlandish, Jeff. That sounds pretty outlandish. So I think what you guys are saying in response to these arguments is that, it's not super hard to believe that Rey would be a 1 in a trillion Force savant. Shit like that just happens. And also, B, the movie is not saying that by itself is enough, right? That in order for humanity or society to succeed, just relying on the saviors like Luke, like Rey, is not enough, right?
The thing
she
that I
knows
love,
that. Yeah, yes. That's why she steals the books. She knows that she isn't going to be alone in all of this, and that the Force isn't just hers, which is what Luke tells her. It's not just one person's or one order's, it's everyone's. So, yeah.
This is what you brought up last week, Dave. I think you were the one that brought it up when we were talking last week about so much of what this movie has to say about being a hero. And in the second viewing, after I'd heard you bring that up, it really drove home that point that, and it's so much of what I love structurally about this movie is people talk about all the Finn Rose storyline being pointless and all the things that don't work. And I love the fact that almost every plan that the rebellion or the resistance attempts to do fails. They try and they fail, and they try and they fail. And then there's a thing you didn't expect to see coming, and that fails. And then you get to the point where you're like, oh my God, how the hell are they going to get out of this one? And then they fail again. And you're like, well, now it's completely bleak and ruined and we can't do anything. And the hero comes in at the last minute and he's just a distraction. He's literally just a distraction. He's not going to save them. He literally says, I can't face down the whole army on my own. So, and that isn't even the way. It turns out it's not about a hero coming in to save us. It's about every one of us has a responsibility to stand up and be part of something. It's the fact that we cumulatively together are stronger than any one, even the most powerful Jedi by themselves. And that's what this movie is saying. That's
also, yeah. Well, I was just going to bounce off that and say that's actually what I'm most interested to see in episode 9, because as we get that sort of thesis statement from Yoda, the greatest teacher failure is, how do they go forward from all of these failures? I think that will be the most interesting thing, because I think what you're saying, a lot of people are calling that a structural flaw, that all of these things are pointless. I don't think they are pointless if they learn something from all of this in the next one.
That's a clear message in the film. It's hammered in many times, but also throughout these movies, right? We've dealt with failure in general,
Empire
right?
is all about failure also.
Empire is all about failure. The Anakin turning into Darth Vader is a failed moment by the Jedi. Like, it is. I like how this movie tries to reconcile all of that. And that's also partially why I like the Yoda scene is great, because it just burns down everything you thought was holy. But also because the Jedi have always been about failure. Like they sat there while the Emperor took over the galactic government, right? And they had no clue. And the greatest, he took over the greatest power that they had, and they were completely clueless to all of that. So where do we go from failure? That's going to be a really interesting concept for the next movie.
And failure is the greatest teacher. I mean, like you said, that is an explicit line that Yoda says. Literally, the best teacher you have is failure. And I think that's something that movies don't say, but it's true. And it's a beautiful sentiment. And to put that in a movie like this, I don't know. That's why this movie,
I don't know if I agree with you that movies don't say that, Jeff. I mean, one of the taglines of Batman was, "Why do we fall down?" I mean, it's not like a completely new concept. I'm just gonna.
I think it's one thing to say it, and it's another to understand it and to sell it and make it the core.
Right.
Core
it is rare. This movie posits, "Hey, we've seen the rebellion succeed again and again. What if that didn't happen?" And I like that this movie explores that. Okay, so I think you guys have argued convincingly against those points about Rey and you know whether what the movie's trying to say. I do think that I don't know that everyone came away with all the stuff that you guys said. You know, because I think that you know there is a big argument in like the /film Slack about like what is the message that this movie's trying to say about failure and about you know leadership and so on and so I do think that the message is either muddled in terms of its telling or that people didn't grasp what the movie, you know, that there is some significant portion of audience that just didn't even grasp what the movie's trying to say.
There's a lot going on in this movie, and it goes on for a while, and it gives you a lot of left turns. So, like, that's why I was saying, like, even watching it a second time, like, there are things I started to notice a little more because I wasn't as concerned with just following that main plot line or just knowing what happens next. And I think that's kind of an important thing. Like, we brought up Kurosawa when we were describing it, like what this film feels like. And to me, that's kind of the idea I'm getting from this, right? I'm feeling Hidden Fortress, and I'm feeling Seven Samurai, of these characters who, I don't know, are not always successes and aren't always heroes, but they do their damnedest to do it. And we see that reflected too in the style of the film. I love the Luke showdown at the very end. There's that one shot where it's just like the camera's behind him and the entire, you know, all the bad guys are right in front of him. It looks like some sort of crazy samurai action shot. So I just love that too. It all kind of goes through.
I want to bring up a few nerd follow-ups to the movie. Okay, so first of all, there's a few things that we said on the last episode that we should kind of correct. Peter Serrata brought up all these nitpicks that have since been addressed. Like, for instance, why do the bombs drop in the opening scene of the film if there's no gravity in space?
How is that an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go to Star Wars expecting scientific rigor, you're looking in the wrong place.
Space fantasy.
There is like a visual dictionary or some visual guide to the movie that you can apparently buy, and in that guide it shows the bombers, and it says, quote, "Bombs don't technically drop in microgravity, but are impelled from their racks by sequenced electromagnetic plates in the clip. The bombs are then drawn magnetically to their unfortunate targets," end quote. So,
oh my
God.
God.
I think I heard a simpler explanation. Somebody said that something the size of the Dreadnought would
has its own
have
gravity field.
Yeah. And then once those bombs are drawn, they would continue moving in the direction that they're going until another force acted upon them.
Right, or that there is like obviously there's gravity on the ship because you know she kicks that around. Yeah, she kicks that you know trigger detonator downstairs. So maybe they're just sent out into space by the gravity from the ship. You know, so
it's not like we're watching a movie about space magic or anything.
Yeah, weird nitpick in my opinion, but
Peter on last week's episode said that I don't remember what he said, but I had said that Rey brought the books on board the Millennium Falcon.
He said Luke brought them.
He said Luke brought them, but that's wrong.
Yeah.
It's actually Rey. So I was right, but I didn't want to contradict him because Peter knows so much more about Star Wars than me. So. But yeah, it was Rey that brought the books on. I mean, that is the explanation.
It's impossible that Luke would have done it because he's on the ship earlier in the movie than it would have happened. So
on that note, I did think it was a little odd that the movie makes this huge deal out of these dice that Luke gives Leia. But unless you're a hardcore fan, you probably don't know what those dice are, right?
They're in Force Awakens.
Yeah, they're a big part of Force Awakens, right? Like a big moment happens.
Hangs them and it like plays music while he hangs them.
Fair enough. But according to Pablo Hidalgo, the story is that those dice were involved in a game of Corellian Spike, a dice-using version of a card game called Sabacc. Rumor has it that Han Solo won the Millennium Falcon from Lando Calrissian with those dice. Whether or not that's just bar talk, I can't say. He says this is one of the people entrusted with Star Wars lore, the Lucasfilm Story Group creative executive Pablo Hidalgo. So, just
an Easter egg for the Han Solo movie, probably.
That's right. I have a feeling we're going to see those dice in that Solo movie.
Well, interestingly, people have pointed out that Rogue One sources the tracking technology, which is super neat.
Yeah. So in Rogue One, when they're going like at the end of Rogue One, there's that whole bank of data tapes. and one of the data tapes is about light speed tracking or hyperspace tracking. Apparently, they didn't get the technology right for another 30 years, but still,
it's a long-term project.
Long-term. They think ahead.
You put all your money into R&D, and eventually it pays off.
But guys, the one thing that I need to talk about, and Devindra, you know what this is about: the Holdo maneuver. Here's the thing, guys. If you introduce the concept of a ridiculously powerful weapon into your world, it does potentially, not necessarily, it potentially has universe-breaking implications. And there is a great article that is one of my favorite articles that I've read about Last Jedi over at TheRinger.com, written by Ben Lindbergh. It's entitled, "The Most Breathtaking Moment in The Last Jedi is Also Its Greatest Threat to Star Wars Lore." And he's talking about the moment in the movie when Vice Admiral Holdo, played by Laura Dern, turns her ship towards the Snoke's ship and the Star Destroyers, travels into light speed, and completely ruins those ships. It's the moment we talked about earlier when the screen goes silent for 10 seconds. So I had to actually leave the movie to go to work early when I saw The Last Jedi a second time. I had to leave the movie early, I should say, to go to work at around 9 a.m. because I saw the 7 a.m. screening. But I basically stayed until that moment in the movie and then just left. Like I wanted to see that moment again because that
moment is a crescendo because it's not just that moment. It's three things all happening at the exact same time, a la Return of the Jedi, with Finn and Rose about to be beheaded, I guess.
Right.
We're supposed to think they're going to be beheaded. And Rey and Kylo with Snoke. And that turned, like, the tension, I find that to be masterful filmmaking. And all of it crescendos into Holdo's maneuver in silence, which I just think is an incredible moment in cinema. But I will say my one tiny criticism of that, which I think is nearly flawless sequence, is I really wish we saw the moment from Finn and Rose's perspective when their ship gets torn asunder. Because we kind of just come back to them.
It's a very weird editing decision, like because they're about to get beheaded, and then next scene, the ship is in shambles, and somehow Phasma and all her people are, 500. They're like a football field away from them. It's a very bizarre moment in the movie. Yeah.
If we had seen, I mean, we understand that that's what happened because we saw this one ship fly into their ship. But if we had seen that even in slow motion or in silence itself or whatever, like that rift appear in their universe, I think it would have been so powerful. And I'm surprised it wasn't included.
Well, the thrust of this article is that the idea that a ship going into light speed could cause catastrophic destruction to a fleet if you just turned it into the fleet, it kind of makes you wonder, well, why didn't they just do that all the time? In previous episodes, like there's a bunch of force powers
because it's super expensive to make a spaceship, and you don't
I don't buy any of that. I mean, I think so. What this article tries to do,
it's not like little planes flying. It's a gigantic Corellian class ship, right?
Yeah, but this one ship took down like 6 ships. It just feels like what this article tries to explore is, why wouldn't they have done that many times before? Why
don't we drive our battleships into other battleships?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, aren't we always supposed to believe that the Resistance and the Rebellion are kind of these scrappy little teams trying to come up against this great brute force, so they don't want to risk their only big ship in these moments, right?
I mean, here's where I strongly disagree with you guys. I mean, I think the ROI on the Holdo maneuver is incredibly high. It's like 6,000%. It's this one tiny ship was able to annihilate or like tear, what appears to be 6 Star Destroyers and something like even bigger than a Star Destroyer in half. And so the idea that you have this incredibly overpowered maneuver does raise the question, like, why wouldn't they do that in the past?
I mean, maybe we don't know, right? This is a universe where the civilization has existed for thousands of years. A lot of things have been lost. Right.
So here's some explanations that the article comes up with, and I want to see if any of them resonate with you. The one explanation is that actually the Holdo maneuver didn't cause the ships to split apart. That the reason the ship split apart is the Kylo Ren Rey showdown, like tearing apart that lightsaber. That doesn't really make any sense because everyone is really freaked out about the ship about to split apart. So it seems to imply that they, like the people, think that going light speed into a ship is going to destroy you.
Read the room.
Here's another thing. The other alternative, Ben writes, what Holdo did is a war crime. Perhaps hyperspace ramming is so horrifically effective that it's been banned by the Yavin Convention. What we thought was heroic was actually the equivalent of a chemical weapons attack. That's the best I can do. So I tweeted this article out, and some people actually brought up another really good possibility, which is that basically the conditions under which she executed the attack were very specific. Like you had to be so close to the ships, right? That most ships aren't able to achieve that level of closeness and that level of aim, or that maybe she kind of brought herself out of light speed at the exact right point to
That's what I felt like.
kind of rip those ships apart. So
I have another one.
Please.
So, before, I guess the only other ships that we've seen that they would have tried to do that into really is like the Death Star, which I think a Star Destroyer is way smaller. So I don't think shooting it in would be effective. And also, this ship is the one that has the tracker on them. So is it effective to just ram your ships into Star Destroyers all the time? No, but if it's one that's actually going to track you and discover you, and the one that that the Emperor, the Supreme Leader, is on, I feel like that's a more useful time to destroy one of your ships than just randomly oh, here's a Star Destroyer, let's ram this in there. So
it is the Hail Maryest of Hail Mary.
Yeah, it's the actual, they know it's the big bad ship.
And the more I think about it, right, I mean, any of those explanations I think could have worked. And it actually makes sense to me that they would not explain that. It would have felt really weird for them to say, what is she doing? That's a war crime. That just would have been, or, you can only pull this off if you're in the ship and it's super close. There's also no way to
evacuate it. She's the only person on it. Other times it would mean killing half your fleet or whatever. So
which brings up another potential plot point, by the way, or plot hole. This is a universe where we have hyperspace travel. We have all this stuff. We don't have remote control.
That's what I'm saying. It seems like it doesn't seem like a very challenging move to make, and it seems like you could program a machine to do it. So if that's the case, wouldn't it be really powerful? You know
how I know that adding a line like that wouldn't have helped anything? Because they literally added a line like that to explain why we haven't seen anyone astral project before, and it didn't help.
Yeah.
What was that? What was the line, Jeff?
The line where Kylo says, "I know you're not doing this. It would kill you." To Rey, which is literally there to say, how come we haven't seen Jedis just force project all over the place? Because it literally kills Luke.
Yeah. So again, I have no problem with that. Some people were saying that this movie introduces a lot of force powers, and people are complaining we've never seen anyone astral project, and they've compared. I saw a tweet comparing that to saying, the first time you saw the Emperor shoot electricity out of his hands in Return of the Jedi, it would be like saying wow, it's breaking the world because the electricity is coming out. That's never happened before. I don't care about any of that. I agree with you that it's fine for the movie to introduce new powers and concepts. That's totally fine. But anyway, I did think the Holdo maneuver is a really interesting kind of thing to ponder. Anyway.
I have one more thing to add to the Holdo thing too, and I could be wrong. I know I've seen it 4 times, so I shouldn't be wrong. But if I recall correctly, that's a last-ditch effort. I don't think that was part of the plan, right? She was left behind to hold it, and once they started bombing all of the transports, that's when she was like, "Shit, I have to do something." So that's probably why they didn't autopilot.
She was going to die with the ship, I think, in order to
not
provide a screen for them to leave. Yeah.
Well, that's actually an argument. That's actually an argument for it being a bigger plot hole, I think, because the fact that someone could do something that destructive, at the last second, feels like we would have seen it or heard about it before. But again,
maybe nobody ever tried it before. Maybe no one knew what would happen if you came out of light speed. That's another really great possibility, Jeff. Is that maybe they just let's never do it. It's matter occupying the same space at the same time, right? Across the streams.
Was it even that destructive if it didn't actually kill anybody important?
True enough.
It was more also a distraction. They could all just get off of it anyway. So
true enough.
True enough. I would say maybe the criticism that provides me the most angst and frustration when I hear people say it is, why didn't Holdo just tell Poe the plan?
Same. That's been my big one.
That makes me so angry. And it is, I think, a case of
I think Devindra actually raised this last week, right?
I brought that up. So
Devindra is one of those people, Jeff.
I think. Well, I don't now. I feel bad because I forgot that Devindra said that. But I do think that's one of those category 2s, thinking they're a category 2 and there might be a category 1. Maybe not in Devindra's case, but it is literally a person who just got demoted.
Yes.
Who we watch look at Holdo and go, wow, that wasn't what I expected. That was the big commander in the battle, that great battle. That not what I expected.
He's a sexist jerk for sure. Yeah.
Right. And we're supposed to go in what military universe does a guy who just got demoted running up and demanding anything of his, not just his superior officer, the commander of the fleet, earn an explanation? In what universe does the military work that way?
Well, I agree with you, Jeff. I just think it would have been nice if she had told him that there was a plan. She wouldn't need to tell him what the plan was.
Fuck that guy. You think
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he just basically demeaned her in every possible way by saying, like, I'm smarter than you because I'm a man. And she's like, fuck off.
The colonel walking through the trenches in World War II and the private going, Colonel, what are we doing here? Fuck you. I'm a colonel.
So
because
also you guys said this last week, but to go back to that, as far as they know, the only person that knows that there's that tracking device tech is Rose and Finn and Poe. Yeah. As far as they know, there's a traitor on board. So why the hell would she tell Poe that they're, what their plan is?
These are all good things. I do feel like the way this entire plan went down, because it seemed like we have no plan. We are just running. Like, there was no, you don't have to tell Poe that there's anything. Like, I just wonder, like, if she communicated to anyone. That's the thing. I understand Poe is like a sexist asshole there. In terms of military structure, yes, I understand. That's probably the way it would go down. In terms of, like, actually, running a team or something, or, like, running a band of rebels where this is the last ditch. You're a handful of people in this, like, Battlestar Galactica nightmare of a scenario. This is like 33 from Battlestar Galactica. Just a little bit of like, hey, we got this, or like there's something. I don't know. There's more. Right. I feel like it could have been communicated better.
Just in terms of it being a movie too, this is kind of where I come to some of it too, is like they want to save that surprise of her being like, actually.
I'm sure.
And I don't know that defies, I don't know that means that you should be illogical or whatever, but I think that happens in movies so often.
It's contrived.
It's way more than that. It is the movie making a very specific point, which is reinforced by that moment where Poe and Finn are talking about the plan and Rose is in the back, and we literally see Finn step in front of her to answer the question. Like, that is a very specific point this movie is making, which is, fuck you, Poe. Fuck you.
I think you're conflating a couple of things here, Jeff, though. What I'm talking about, yes, the movie addresses all these issues of, like, sexism and, like, how guys try to take credit for what women come up with and things like that. Specifically here, I just feel like it is contrived. This is a situation where information just isn't revealed until a convenient time.
No,
and that's really
sat there. Dude, this movie is saying a very specific thing. He sat there, and we see that woman, who I don't even know her name, but she says, Leia, General Organa is down. We have to promote somebody to the commanding officer. And Poe is like, here I go. It's my time to be awesome. And they go, and it's Holdo. And he's like, what the fuck? And she walks out, and then he's like, that's the amazing Holdo. That can't be right.
Yeah.
This movie is saying
she's in a dress.
And literally every moment after that, he assumes he should know and he should be making the decision. And this movie is saying a very specific thing, and I think it's not contrived because it's thematic. That's the theme of the movie.
I will grant you that. I'll grant you that, Jeff. I mean, I know Devindra may not, but I'll grant you that. But here's what really felt weird to me the second time seeing it is we see Poe Dameron mutiny, pull a gun on Holdo.
Yep.
And then the next scene, he's in a stretcher, and then Holdo says,
I love that guy.
Yeah. Like, Leia says he's a troublemaker, and Holdo says, yeah, I like him. I was like, did I miss a reel of this film? Was there something that happened that endeared this guy to Holdo in some way? Because all he's ever done is literally threaten her life and demean her.
Yeah. I feel like they cut several scenes between them or something. Yeah.
I don't want to play the like I'm a woman card, but I can say I can relate to that feeling where you can see that there's passion sometimes in guys undermining you to the point where you're like, I know he doesn't mean that I am bad. I think his heart is in the right place. He's just being an asshole, and I'm not going to give him the credit.
Hopefully, every time I've interrupted you tonight, you felt that.
Yeah, it's a common. I think it's a common feeling, which is like it doesn't mean I hate you, and I think that's something that comes up a lot when people are like women hate men or whatever, or feminists hate men. I think it's not that. It's that sometimes it's like you've just got to let me do what I need to do. It doesn't mean I dislike you. So I think she senses that his heart is in the right place, and she knows he's a good person. Mm-hmm. He's just bugging the shit out of her. So that's kind of what I got out of it. I agree that there's some kind of stuff there. The other thing I'm left wondering is maybe Leia laid some plan out that if this happens, she was trying to respect Leia, I think, in that, and that Leia had just demoted him. I don't know. I think that there's a little more to it that way, just between the two of them. Yeah. That's kind of how I read it.
Well, but before like all that happened too, I think they said one of the things Leia was saying was like they had to find a base that's powerful enough for them to like send out distress signal. And we knew that was like the ultimate mission. I feel like they could have filled in some little blank there to give us an indication that was something we were leading to. Otherwise, it just felt like for the longest time, it did feel like Holdo just had them on a suicide mission of just running away with no real plan.
To kind of bounce off of this is semi-related, but my biggest like complaint about the movie is that randomly just halfway through they start calling themselves the Rebels instead of the
Well, it's kind of hilarious that we've been using Rebels and Empire and First Order and Emperor and Snoke like interchangeably. You know, there is a lot of.
But this movie just gives right into it. Like when they're flying away, she's like, Godspeed, Rebels, which also bothers me because Godspeed doesn't feel like something you'd say.
At least Finn gets the Rebel scum line, which is, I think, pretty well played.
I'm not so sure we're doing a great job of representing all of the viewpoints of people that hate this movie. There's a few that...
I'm doing my best, Jeff, but you keep shooting me down.
Well... Your best just isn't good enough, Dave.
Yeah, apparently.
No, I'm just kidding. There are a few more points that I want to bring up that I have heard.
Sorry.
One of which fits in right here because we're kind of talking about it. But a lot of people, I don't understand this. I don't get it. I don't agree with it. But a lot of people have expressed this notion that the plot is thin, like not much happens in this movie, which I don't understand. They think I've heard, it just feels like an episode of television. And as Devindra brought up, specifically an episode of Battlestar Galactica, the pilot. But I don't feel that way, but I'm wondering if it resonates for any of you guys that literally it doesn't push the narrative forward enough.
I mean, in a bit, because it's a really character focused movie is the thing, right? Like we are learning about Rose and Finn, and they have like this whole adventure together, and they have, I think, the best meet cute in the entire Star Wars franchise. Now that I look at all of this, and then it's Rey and Luke and Kylo. Like it is all these characters kind of interacting, and Poe learning a lesson. So at the end of the day, the overarching plot of what the Rebels do, it feels pretty simple, right? They just run away for 2.5 hours, basically.
Yeah, I get that. I just feel like it feels bigger to me because you're literally watching the good guys get decimated. You're watching again and again and again them going down to just a skeleton crew of a few stragglers. It is they go from being capable of taking down a dreadnought, with having a sort of tete-a-tete equally, well, maybe not equally, but hold their own in a big battle at the very beginning of the movie, to just being completely almost wiped out. And I find that progression of like, no, this is the one where, it's one thing in Empire to watch our heroes get to their end, but this is literally like everyone on the good side is wiped out. And I don't know. I found that to be pretty important and impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument against that, Jeff, is just that, against your position, is just that we started this movie with the rebellion on the run, and now they're still on the run, and there's slightly less of them. You know, that...
Sure.
That, again, I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think that I sympathize with that viewpoint, that people think that the end state was not necessarily that different than the beginning state.
That's Empire. That's the thing that's always bothered me, or not always bothered me, but some of the arguments that I've seen against some of the stuff is that within Star Wars logic, there are so many other examples of the same thing happening. So to act like this is kind of betraying stuff that we've seen before is...
Yeah. Oh, no, I don't think
I'm not even mad at it.
Yeah, I don't think
right,
it's betraying
I'm just
stuff.
curious. I'm curious where that mindset, or where the people who are really angry about it, I'm just curious where that comes from with a lot of this. And that's one of the things that surprised me the most. The same example I can think of is with the humor stuff. I've seen so much, anger that the humor is really bad, and that's when I just don't really understand. So like, that's not Star Wars humor, and I'm like, but what are we considering Star Wars humor? In the prequels, there's literally a scene where Jar Jar gets punched in the balls by a droid. Like, is that Star Wars? Yeah, he does like the blue like thing with the like. There's so much dumb shit in that movie.
Leia talking about a walking carpet. That's
walking carpet. Also, my other one that I keep using is Leia saying, "Would it help if I got out and pushed?" Like with the Falcon. Like, there's so much world-breaking kind of humor in the texture of Star Wars movies that I don't get how anything here breaks that necessarily.
That's a great one that I've never heard anybody bring up before, but that is a great one because I think people complain about that first scene where it's like, I'm holding. Yeah, like like the concept of being on hold is something that wouldn't be in the Star Wars universe. You know what wouldn't be in the Star Wars universe? The concept of getting out of something and pushing it because it has wheels.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of stuff like that. Or I mean, Han's joke about whatever the detention center one feels pretty similar to what Poe is kind of saying. Also, Poe, I've seen some people say that scene drags in the beginning, but it's because he's stalling. That's the whole point of that scene, is that he's trying to stall. So
here's something that I saw a very strong reaction to, that many people have referred to the Leia reanimating scene as the worst scene in the film. I've seen that more than once.
It's crazy.
And upon second viewing, I think that there are many. I can see many ways why that scene would not work for people. And on a basic level, this film has some amazing visual effects and some visual effects that are only okay to bad. I would say the Leia effect is okay to bad. I would say like the Rey lifting the rocks at the end, that's pretty bad. There's some stuff that's okay to bad. And so on a pure visual level, I can understand why it just doesn't work for people.
And that's what I thought the argument was when I first heard it. I thought people were just mad that it looked kind of goofy, which I can agree with. It kind of took me out of it a little bit. But some of the arguments are that just like that they don't think she could do that or that whatever, and that's something silly.
Because we know how the Force works, right? It's written in stone.
Right.
To your question...
I don't remember whether it looked bad or not, because both times I saw it, I was watching it through tears.
Yeah.
So. Crying. Yeah. It's a little like Superman-y in a way that doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
To what you were saying though, Jeff, like the plot thing, I think people tend to forget like how simple the plots of some of our favorite movies can be. Like just rewatching Blade Runner recently, like Decker goes and talks to a guy and talks to this other guy, he chases these other people, and then we're done. Like
Deckard has almost no influence on the outcome of that film.
Yeah. So, there's a lot more going on than just the plot.
A guy was gonna die, and then that guy died.
And to go back to Empire, not to keep quoting that, but Empire, half that movie is them just running away in the asteroid field. Like, there's not really a lot of plot to that, but that doesn't mean it's not good. There's good character stuff while they're running away, but plot-wise, it's not super heavy.
I loved that scene with Leia coming back to life so much. Like it means so much to me, and I know it had added weight because we literally watched Carrie Fisher come back to life. I mean, I don't think that's I don't know. I don't think that takes away from the movie, but I also don't give credit to the movie. I mean, that's a complete other thing that I bring to it. But over and above that, I thought that moment was so powerful conceptually inside the Star Wars universe. Of here's someone that we know is Luke's twin sister, and you think is Force sensitive, and we've only ever felt some inkling of that she has this, and in this moment, in her moment of absolute crisis, it sparks to life in a way that is far more powerful than we've ever seen the Force used. And I don't think that she was dead and then was not dead.
No,
I think I think the Force, like, in the same way that fucking what's his name? Star-Lord, is like, he's mostly dead. He's mostly dead.
Almost dead, yeah.
John in the chat room says, Rian Johnson compared Leia's force power to those stories of humans lifting cars to save children, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah, I saw that too.
It needed that crisis for her to be that.
Right. My favorite tidbit about that scene that I read this week is that apparently it was Kathleen Kennedy asking him to add a moment where Leia uses the Force. So it was a woman giving the direction. Like, it'd be really cool if we saw a woman, if we saw Leia, not just a woman, but an older woman, get to use the Force in a way that is usually saved for kind of these young, cool men or Luke Skywalker. So I thought that was kind of powerful.
Is that also our first example of somebody actually being outside in space, surviving outside in space, right? This is a series without spacesuits, even though we spend most of our time in space, and I always find that kind of fun. I want to see a lightsaber fight in space at some point. That's all I want.
Wasn't Colin Trevorrow gonna like shoot some stuff on the vomit comet?
Actual in space, wasn't he?
So we'll never see that, unfortunately, but we'll see what JJ does. Also, someone. I was watching Red Letter Media's review of The Last Jedi, and they brought up the fact that this is a movie. In many ways, this movie subverts expectations. And honestly, I love that about it. I love that.
Me too.
Fanboys are so pissed about it because they've spent years crafting these elaborate theories, and then Rian Johnson's just like, F that. But
it's not that the theory was wrong, it's that the question was wrong.
Right. Or that maybe you shouldn't have spent all this time focusing on these theories. Like, it's like the question of why was, like, did the top fall down at the end of Inception or not? It's like, that's not the right question to be asking, kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
And so what do you call it? So they were saying on this their review of The Last Jedi that like Rian Johnson is in many ways trolling people and doing away with things that previous films have done. One of the things they pointed out in this review was that you don't see a lightsaber touch another lightsaber in this film.
Sure.
The prequels, it's like, I think in Attack of the Clones, you literally see 100 lightsabers on screen at one time,
which is why I love Attack of the Clones.
You see lightsaber battle, like every movie ends with a massive lightsaber battle in that series. Actually, I think all three films end with massive lightsaber battles, right?
Yes.
And here's a movie where there is no lightsaber battle. And
although one of the best choreographed battles we've ever gotten in a Star Wars movie. So I take that. I take that for it.
Yeah, but I wasn't saying that, Devindra, I wasn't saying that as a negative. I think some people are upset about that decision as well as many other decisions.
Honestly, I was a little disappointed that we didn't really get a lightsaber fight until later on, but that for me, that one big massive fight made up for that. Just saying.
Yeah, I think having a lightsaber fight, maybe not a lightsaber duel, but a lightsaber fight that matters to these characters and matters for where they're at, isn't that so much more rewarding than just like some empty badass moment where people fight? I don't get that.
You think that this moment, in this movie with all these characters that we're invested in is better than like 100 faceless Jedi that we don't know battling it out in this big arena in Attack of the Clones?
That Coliseum scene
shockingly,
is awesome. Yes. That Coliseum scene is great. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
I didn't even notice. Here's how much I don't care that I didn't even notice until afterwards that there wasn't an actual lightsaber on lightsaber. And I think there's an implied lightsaber on lightsaber. Maybe it doesn't physically touch, but the Luke and Kylo thing.
Yes.
That's one of the things I love so much is that there's a lightsaber duel without lightsabers touching, and that's fucking awesome. So I think that's,
Part of the thing I love too about that scene is how they hold the lightsabers and how they stand. Because it's not like anybody else. The way that Kylo stands, or when he takes his lightsaber out and he like stamps his foot when he turns it on, and like he stands in this really awkward, like hunched over, leaning forward stance.
Well, it's very heavily inspired by samurai stances, I believe.
Yes,
So
and that's like
awesome.
an overly aggressive stance, like no defense in what he's doing. He's just like there to tear shit up.
Oh, it's so badass, man. That scene is so badass.
The choreography in that scene is so damn good. And then the underhanded moment for Rey, because we don't really see underhanded lightsaber stuff very often, too. So, you know, there's a lot of fun stuff, things going on there for people who really like fight choreography.
All right,
guys, I was talking about not even that, but I was talking about the Luke and Kylo thing, which is also, you know, I know that that's much shorter and different, but that's this
more
kind
like
of
a Western showdown almost.
Yeah, totally.
Well, guys, we're an hour and 40 minutes in. I've tried my level best to represent, negative viewpoints in the film, and I've been shouted down at every opportunity. No, but it's cool. It's cool. I mean, I really have enjoyed hearing you guys talk about the film and appreciate you entertaining these complaints in a serious way. Are
there any other Category 3 things, like maybe from your fiance or anybody that you've heard? Category 3?
What she said, one of the things she said was that, you know, what she texted me was, you know how some movies have third act problems? This movie I felt like was first and second act problems. You know, that I think in terms of 3-act structure, the movie is really muddy. Like, I don't think it really has a very clean...
It's a 5-act
movie. Yeah, like you said, like 5-act structure. I think you brought that up, Devindra. But I think, I did a Periscope with her at periscope.tv/Dave Chensky, and we argued a little bit about the Rey and Luke scenes, right? And how, me, David Chen, I can imagine people thinking those scenes are really frustrating and unpleasant.
Right.
I mean, we usually see in scenes like that, you know, hey, I need you to come back for one last job, right? And no, I've given up that. I'm not doing that anymore. And then 2 conversations later, they're going back for one last job. This movie, it literally takes 2 hours for that character to decide to come back for one last job. And for a significant part of that time, he's just completely stonewalling her. We don't see him really engage with her in a meaningful way. He's just instead, you know, drinking green milk and, you know, gallivanting around, lugging around fish. It does feel like, I think there's just confusion as to why are we watching him milking this thing when we could be watching him have an interesting dialogue with Rey about, or explaining to Rey what's actually happening. And some people see that as a bold choice that, hey, what if they went to the master and he said no and just didn't say anything, like refused to talk to you? That some people see that as a bold choice. Other people see that as just bad storytelling or really frustrating storytelling. Yeah. And I can understand both viewpoints. So that's another,
I've heard similar complaints too. Like it's the difference between being maybe kind of annoyed that it's not the movie you want it to be, rather than seeing what the movie is and trying to deconstruct what it's doing. Like it is. I've heard from a lot of people who consider themselves Star Wars fans who are annoyed that it drops a lot of plot threads from Force Awakens. I've heard people not truly satisfied with Rey's arc, which I think I just don't know how to parse that one. But there's, I think, in some sense in Category 3, like a greater sense that it's not the movie they wanted it to be, therefore it's a bad movie. Which I feel like that's a dangerous way to watch anything.
Let me just say, I don't agree that what I said amounts to what you just said. Like I don't
no,
think
I'm not saying that. I'm saying what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I think that if we were watching a movie that wasn't a Star Wars film, that had 2 hours of this person going to a master and trying to convince him to come join the battle, and the master spent a significant part of the time literally just saying nothing, that some people might find that frustrating, and I can understand that. But another point, so let's talk about Rey's arc real quick. I mean, we could spend another 2 hours talking about this movie, so I do want to respect everyone's time. But Rey's arc, real quick. I mean, I think like one thing people have said that like they don't find it interesting is that she never really deviates from being a good person. You know, that I never got the sense that she was tempted by the dark side in the way that I felt like Luke was tempted in the original trilogy. But tell me, like, please tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm like, if you did feel that way, you know, like, yeah.
I did feel that way personally. There's that scene where she literally almost strikes him down with a lightsaber, and they fight, and that's when he first uses the Force again, which I noticed on my second rewatch. Is he has that moment where he reconnects with Leia, kind of, and that's when he seems to like have fully reconnected. But when Rey strikes him down is when he stops himself from falling with the Force and kind of giving this inclination that he's back with it. But that was the moment to me where I was like, oh shit, like I would not be surprised if she runs off with Kylo and something more happens there. There's anger in her face. And there's also the scene when he's first showing her the Force and how to connect with it, and she turns right to the dark side right away, or the cave thing. He says that was the darkest thing, and you just ran right to it. You didn't even question it. So I think it does tempt it more than I expected it to.
I guess I just feel like Ridley's performance is really effective at conveying that she is very pure of heart, you know, and that I guess I just never really felt like she would ever go that way, you know?
I think it's more like she's very willful, right? If she sets her mind out to do something, this character, even if it means attacking the fabled Luke Skywalker, if she believes he did something wrong, she'll do it. And I found that to be really motivating and interesting, honestly.
Okay. All right.
I want to point out something that I noticed at the end. Well, one of the big arguments that I got in on privately with people who will remain nameless was that the Luke's ability to do the astral projection isn't seeded anywhere. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's because it's such a big thing to be able to do that it feels a bit like a Deus Ex Machina or some kind of convenient contrivance rather than something that you could have seen coming but didn't because of the way how good the movie is. You know, it's not like Crossing the Streams in Ghostbusters where it's seeded at the beginning of like, oh, we can't ever do that, and like, oh, that's the one thing we have to do. But I love, you know, and I think
what's so convenient about it? That's my question. You have to kill yourself to do this,
right? No, I don't agree with this criticism. I like the fact that Luke is literally has renounced the Force, is washed up, is out of practice, knows he's too weak to show up and face down an entire army, but and the movie's saying it isn't about that. It isn't about a hero coming at the end and saving everybody. He's literally just a distraction. He's just a distraction. And I realized he is a phantom menace.
Yeah.
How dare you? Cool. How dare you, Jeff?
Yeah. he's quite literally a phantom menace for the First Order.
Anyway. All right, the taxation behind.
Last question, guys, for all of you. I mean, I think people were thinking, you know, they're setting up Snoke as the big bad for Episode 9, and now that's not going to happen anymore because Snoke's dead.
Good.
And so this on the one hand, Rian Johnson's really kind of made things difficult for J.J. Abrams directing Episode 9. But on the other hand, he's also really given J.J. Abrams a lot of leash to do what he wants, because J.J. Abrams could start this next movie 5 minutes after The Last Jedi, or he could start it 5 years after The Last Jedi. You know, he's not leaving it like this episode we knew was gonna have to deal with the Rey Luke thing somehow. But the next episode he can do anything he wants. You know, maybe Rey is a general at that point. You know, like anything is possible. Is there? But I guess.
JJ left his playground really messy, and Ryan like cleaned up after himself.
Yeah.
You know.
So I think my favorite tweet about this was, I think Alan Scherstall from Village Voice said, you know how in improv class you're supposed to say yes and, you know, J.J. Abrams is like, okay, here's like The Force Awakens, you know, and now you're supposed to say yes and Rian Johnson just says no. But I'm butchering it, of course. But so is there anything you guys are looking forward to in the next episode, or is there something you think is gonna happen? Like, do you think the next episode is gonna be about like Kylo Ren's redemption or Rey turning to the dark side? Kind of what are you looking forward to, or what do you think will happen in the next episode? Anyone?
I think this is gonna be a Daenerys Jon Snow situation. Not that they're going to get it on, but that we're going to realize that, or I think where it's headed, where it seems to be headed now that you can't have a Carrie Fisher in the movie, because I think previously where it was headed was Kylo being tempted by the light and his emperor is Leia. But I think where it's headed now, it seems to me, is that you can't have an all light universe and you can't have an all dark universe. You have to find a way for both to coexist. And there was going to be some sort of coming together of the fire and the ice, I think. And I think you see the seeds of that in this movie with Rey and Kylo sort of connecting in a way that those two sides aren't supposed to connect. Like, they understand each other. They both understand each other in a way that no one else can, and they're each other's mirror image. And the way that you sort of can combine those two things to create something even more stable, I think maybe where we're headed.
All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lindsay, anything you're psyched about?
Yeah, I actually kind of wrote about that on Thrillist.com this week, about how there's kind of this concept of gray Jedi. I don't know that it'll be quite that specific, but I agree that I think there will be that Rey, in stealing the books and in kind of knowing that she has to continue this order, but in a different way than it's ever been before, has to find some way of removing, as Luke calls it, the vanity from the Force, and making it not a concept of Sith or Jedi, but just making it everyone who's Force sensitive can use it in a way that's positive and not picking sides, I guess. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I'm really hopeful for. I don't know where I fall about the Kylo redemption thing. I think the door's open for it. I don't know that I want it. I think he's kind of really situated himself as the bad guy. He's in both movies now made a very clear choice to choose the dark path, and I think I'd rather Rey just kill him, but whatever. Maybe that's not totally what I should want, but yeah. And I also hope there's a significant time jump. That's my biggest hope. I want to see them, like, after they've kind of regathered forces in the Outer Rims or whatever they were talking about, and having a little bit more stability. Maybe they're still the underdogs, but have sort of woken up this fight among people in the other planets, the more impoverished people and stuff. And yeah, I want to see Poe Dameron with a beard. That's my biggest hope. That's all I really want. Beard. Yeah. Scruffy Poe Dameron. Yep.
All right, guys. Well, I think we can wrap it up. I feel like I could talk with you guys about this movie for another hour, but it is getting late.
Is that?
Kind of a good movie.
Maybe
I actually have one more. I have one more mini point. I promise I won't go on for too long, but I do want to say I can empathize, and I don't want to be a total apologist for this film. I can empathize with the people that were really heartbroken by it. I really hated Rogue One. I was that person last year. The people who hate this movie, it kind of broke my spirit a little bit. Not so much.
Which also hasn't aged well too. So
yeah.
I actually, I watched it recently, and I still like it. Anyway, just putting that out there.
And that's fair. Yep. That's fair. My overall point is that I know what it feels like to be a Star Wars fan who doesn't like a Star Wars movie. Mm-hmm. And a thing that I think is an important thing to keep in mind is that even if something's canon or not canon or whatever, you can be selective about how you choose to see things. If for you, Star Wars ends in Return of the Jedi, if that's Luke's story that you want to preserve in your mind, you can kind of seclude that off, and that's special to you, and maybe these movies are just whatever. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as fans, and I think that's something that will help us not be so vitriolic and cruel to one another, is just learn how to be selective about your fandom. You don't have to be angry if it's not what you wanted it to be, or, whatever. That's kind of just an end point.
My favorite tweet that I saw this week, somebody said, there's a petition going around to have this
removed from the canon.
Stricken. You got to let me do the joke, Dave.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, do it again. I'll delete it. Yeah.
Okay. To have this movie stricken from the canon, but Star Wars fans should know better than anybody else. If you strike something down, it only rises up stronger than you could possibly imagine.
Nice.
It's true.
I thought that was a pretty good tweet.
I thought you were going to go with the direction of canon, like the canon pun somehow, like given that that there's
stricken had to say stricken, or else it wouldn't have worked. See?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's. Let's just put it this way: I'll be very disappointed if there is a laser mounted on a gigantic planet-sized vehicle.
Oh, I know, right?
In episode 9.
If the Star Killer base is actually operational.
Yeah, I mean, guys, how disappointed would you be if that was the case? Like, I think we'd all be pretty disappointed, right?
It would be, especially because of what this movie is saying, which is like, fuck all that, fuck all that noise. Yeah.
The thing that would really break my heart is if JJ walks back the Rey parentage reveal too, and is like, actually, Kylo was lying, and like that would.
It's very possible he could do that. He could.
It is. Yeah, it is.
I think
that would be a massive mistake.
Yeah.
I'm very excited for this. Well, first of all, one thing that was pointed out was there's a scene. If we're geeking out about random stuff, one thing that was pointed out was there's a scene where Rey is really happy about rain falling down in the Octo planet, and someone on Reddit pointed out she probably has never seen rain before in her entire life.
Yeah,
I just thought, that was a great moment when she's kind of like reaching over under the Falcon, and there's rain coming down, and she's really psyched about it. And when I first saw the movie, I was like, "Huh, what was up with that?" But now it's clear. Yeah, maybe she's never seen rain before. It's all so new and exciting for her. So I thought that was delightful. But yeah, I'm really excited for the unknown. In the future of this series, that we've so much of what this franchise has revolved around is this eternal struggle between the rebellion and the First Order or the Empire, whatever the hell you want to call them, those two sides. It's all about this war. It's all about this struggle. We've talked in the past about how, it would be so great if there was a heist film, in the Star Wars universe. There was, but it was centered around stuff that we already know about,
Yeah.
So the next one is Han Solo, because we don't know what his deal is yet.
Right. So I'm curious in what directions they can take this movie, this franchise, because all we know about the franchise is the stuff around the Death Star, and I would say 90% of it is just about this struggle, this war, and AT walkers. All this stuff is about conflicts that we've seen. Yeah, and there is now the potential to do something crazy and new and interesting, and we'll see if JJ picks it up and does that in episode 9.
And after The Force Awakens, it really seemed like you could plot out where the trilogy was going and how it would. You didn't know the exact beats, but it felt like, I see the overarching, template here. And the fact that that's all blown up, what a gift to give everybody to not know. I mean, I think Peter.
I'm not sure J.J. Abrams feels that way, but it's a gift to all of us. Yeah.
Well, I think Peter had an interview on /film.com with Rian Johnson that is a spoilery interview, and they make that exact point. He says, Ryan says something and Peter says, I have no idea where it's going. And Ryan says, isn't that exciting? And I'm like, yeah, it absolutely is exciting. Like that is the best gift you could give the fandom is we're not just wondering who really is Snoke. We're like, what is in store for us in general? Like that's an amazing place to be.
I can't wait for Star Piece.
Star Piece.
That's Rian Johnson's trilogy.
Yeah,
it's just a bunch of people doing really charitable work.
Just chilling, explore all these planets. Yeah.
All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Hopefully, people listening have gotten a lot out of it. Lindsay, tell us where we can find more of your work on the internet.
Yeah, you can find me on /film.com. You can also find me on Thrillist, Vulture. I'm kind of all over the place. I'm a freelancer. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, actually, at Lindsay Romaine. So.
All right, cool. And you guys know where to find us. So I'm just going to wrap it up here. Thanks for listening. Yep. Next week, we'll be back with The Post, a review of the new Steven Spielberg movie. But we might be a couple days late because we spent 2 hours talking about The Last Jedi today. So thanks for listening. We'll see you later.